Okay, so today's daf is Nun Gimel. We're going to start at Nun Bet, Amud Bet, bottom of the page, New Mishnah. This is still dealing with issues of animals and what they are allowed to or not allowed to be wearing when they go out on Shabbat. Because we have to be concerned that they're not carrying what's considered a burden. Because we are also commanded to ensure that our animals rest on Shabbat. So the Mishnah says, Chamor yotze b'marda'at b'zman shekishurabo. That there are two things that you would put on a donkey. One is the saddle itself, and the other one is the marda'at, is the saddle cloth that would sometimes be worn separately, just so that now normally it goes under the saddle, but it would be worn separately sometimes for warmth purposes. So it says the chamor can go out with that if it's tied on. Zecharim yotzin levuvin. Male animals can go out levuvin. We're going to see what levuvin means in the Gemara. So we're not going to comment on what it means yet. Okay, that's talking about rams. Rams can go out livuvin. Rechelot yotzot shechuzot kivulot uchvonot. All of these terms are going to be explained later in the Gemara. So it says that female sheep can go out with all of these things, whatever they are. Ha'izim yotzot serurot, and female goats can go out with their udders tied. Okay? They would do this either to preserve the milk, or sometimes they would do it to dry up the milk so that the animal would stop lactating. So we'll see which one it is in a minute. Rabbi Yossi oser bechulan. Rabbi Yossi doesn't allow anything in this Mishnah, chutz min harachelena kivunot, except for female sheep being kivunot, which we'll see what that is later. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, izim yotzeot serurot liyabesh aval lo lechalev. Rabbi Yehuda says, I agree that female goats can go out with their udders tied, but only if it's to dry the udders, not if it's to preserve the milk. Okay, well, and the simple reason for that is that when they would tie to preserve the milk, they would tie it more loosely, so it was less firmly affixed to the animal, and maybe the tie is going to fall off, as opposed to tying it tightly to stop it from lactating, where we're not concerned that the tie is going to fall off. Now, the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel says, Vukshuralo me'erev Shabbat. When we said that the marda'at, the saddle cloth, can be put on the back of the donkey to warm it, that's only if you tied it before Shabbat. You can't put it on Shabbat. And what we're going to see in this sugya is there are certain levels of animal care. This is very not PETA-esque. Certain levels of animal care that are permitted on Shabbat, and certain levels that are considered unnecessary doting on the animal, and therefore not allowed on Shabbat because it's a tircha, because it's additional work. So
why can't you put the saddle since clearly you're not allowed to ride here?
Right? The cloth is by itself, just the cloth.
Just the cloth, not
to warm the back of the animal.
So we're not talking about the saddle.
Or even well, we're going to see what the deal is with the saddle, but whatever you're doing here is only to warm it. Okay? So Amar Rav Nachman says, Matnitnin nama dika. We can infer this from another Mishnah, from another source, because how so? Because the Katana, it says, Ena chamor yotze b'marda'at b'zman shi kishuralo. Sheina kishuralo. Because it says that the donkey cannot go out with its, and this is a Mishnah that appears on the next daf, that the donkey cannot go out with the saddle cloth when it's not tied on. So how can we infer from that it has to be tied on from before Shabbat? As follows. So what are we talking about? Now obviously if it were not tied on at all, that would be obvious. So the Mishnah doesn't have to tell you that you can't let it go out with a completely untied saddle cloth, because you would know that. You're not going to let it go out because it's going to fall and you're going to carry it. What it means is you can't let it go out if it's wearing a saddle cloth that wasn't tied me'erev Shabbat. Meaning that our Mishnah, where it discusses a tied-on saddle cloth, is talking about a tied-on saddle cloth from before Shabbat. Shema Bina, and that is the conclusion we can make, that it has to be tied on before Shabbat. And the reason being, most seem to interpret it because of the tircha. It's an additional exertion that you're making that's unnecessary to give extra comfort to the animal that isn't necessary on Shabbat. Tanya Namiachi, we learned in a Braita. Chamor yotze b'marda'at b'zman shikshura lo me'erev Shabbat. Velo be'ukaf afal pi shekshar le'erev Shabbat. That when it comes to a saddle cloth, if it was tied on before Shabbat, you can let it go out with it on Shabbat. But a saddle, even if it was tied on from before Shabbat, you cannot let it go out with it on Shabbat. And and even though it's offering extra heat to the animal, there's a concern that the saddle will fall off, or perhaps that the saddle is going to make it look like you're riding it, or whatever the case may be. It's more than necessary for whatever the reason is. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer af beukaf bazman shekushra lo erev Shabbat. Actually, according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, even a saddle can be left on the animal because it warms the animal. However, he says, as long as you don't put the extra fasteners, there were extra fasteners on the saddle over the front of the animal, over the breast of the animal, and under the tail that were put there if it was going to be carrying a load or a person, so that it wouldn't fall off.
In other words, it makes the saddle unusable for a person.
For a person or for a burden to be carried. So it's clear that you're not doing it for that purpose, you're only doing it for the heating of the animal. So that would be allowed according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, because you're making it clear that it's only being affixed for warmth purposes. Ba'aminei Rav Asi Bar Natan me Rabbi Chia Bar Rav. Rav Asi Bar Natan asked Rabbi Chia Bar Rav the following question. Bar Rav Ashi, sorry. Rabbi Chia Bar Rav Ashi. He asked the following question. Mahu liten marda'at al gabe chamor b'Shabbat. Can you put the saddle cloth on Shabbat? Now we said before you can't do it, but now he's saying, can you put it on Shabbat? Amar le, he said to him, mutar, you're allowed. Amar le, he said to him, ma benzel ukaf. What's the difference between this and the case of the saddle? Why can you put the saddle cloth but not the saddle? Ishtik, he didn't answer him. So he assumed he meant you can put the saddle on too. Didn't say anything. There is an objection. It says if you accidentally left the saddle on your donkey, don't take it off. It's muktzeh, actually, the saddle, because it's for riding the animal. Just let it fall off. Let it walk around until it falls off, because if it wasn't securely fastened. So you see, you're not allowed to. Now, if you can't even take off a saddle, obviously you can't put it on. So how can you tell me that you're allowed to put on a saddle cloth and you're allowed to put on a saddle? So Amar le Rabbi Zera said, Shivake, leave him alone. He holds like his own teacher, because Rav Chia Bar Ashi said in the name of Rav, that you are allowed to put a feeding bag, basket, over the animal, hang it on its neck so that it can eat easily, and you can put a saddle cloth on its back. Now apparently, perhaps the reason for the distinction is because you're not tying on the saddle cloth, you're just putting it on for warmth, like a blanket. Okay? So he's saying you're allowed to do that, and you're also allowed to hang a basket on its neck so that it can easily eat. Okay? So now if over there, when it's because of enjoyment, why is it a kal v'chomer? In other words, why is it that if you can hang a basket of food over its neck, you can certainly put a saddle cloth on it? Because if you're allowed to increase its enjoyment by making food more readily available by hanging the basket over its neck, certainly you can alleviate its cold. It's cold, the donkey, to put a blanket on it. Being cold is worse than being hungry, than having the inconvenience of having to bend over to eat. Okay? So therefore, certainly you can do it. Shmuel says, Mardat mutar taskal asur. I agree you can put the saddle cloth on its back for warmth, but you cannot hang a basket on its neck. Because I say, Shmuel says that taking off the donkey's cold, alleviating its feeling of being cold is allowed. But putting a basket around its neck so it can eat more easily, it can eat without the basket. It doesn't need it. So therefore, it's not considered necessary. Azal Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef. Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef went to Israel. Amra l'shmata de Rav kamed Shmuel, and he told. I'm sorry, it doesn't say he went to Israel. That's the next part. He went and he told Shmuel the teaching of Rav, that even putting a basket around the neck is allowed. Amar le Yachi Amar Abba. If Abba said this, lo yada b'milei de Shabbat avlo klum. He doesn't know anything about the laws of Shabbat. What a nice compliment. All right. He called him Abba, father, which either is a term of endearment or a term of respect. He wasn't trying to put him down as. He's like, I'm not putting the person down. I'm just saying he has no idea what he's talking about. Okay? So he says he's wrong. Kisalik Rabbi Zera when he went to Israel. Ashkachayla Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefet, Yativa Kamar Lai, Mishmeid Rabbi Yochanan. He found Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefet telling over the teaching in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Notnin Mardat al Gabe Chamor b'Shabbat, that you're allowed to put the saddle cloth on the back of the donkey on Shabbat to warm it. Amar Lei said to him, Yashar, you're doing straight. You're right, like Yashar Koyach, right? You're right. V'chein tirgama Aryoch beBavel. That's exactly what Aryoch said in Babylonia. Aryoch Manu, and who is Aryoch? Shmuel. He said that's exactly what Shmuel said in Babylonia. Why did he say that only Shmuel says you can put the saddle cloth on the back of the donkey? Doesn't Rav also say that? What he heard was both. He heard that you can put the saddle cloth, but you can't put the basket of food around the neck. And that's why he said, Yashar, you're straight, you're right. And this is exactly what Shmuel said in Bavel, that you can alleviate the pain of the donkey by putting the blanket over his back, but you can't put the basket of food around the neck.
Oh, so maybe alleviating the pain.
And one is convenience.
Convenience.
Right. So, everybody agrees though that putting the saddle cloth is allowed. So, why is it different than a saddle? So in other words, you're allowed to put on the saddle cloth, but we said you can't take off the saddle. Even if it's, let's say the animal's overheated, you can't take its saddle off. Why not? Because it can come off by itself, you don't need to. But the saddle cloth is not going to fall on the back of the animal by itself. Okay? So Rav Papa says, Kam lechamema, kam letzanena. Lechamema it latzara, letzanena let latzara.
But wait, so what if it can come up like that?
In other words, you don't have to get involved. Just let the animal walk around, it'll fall off.
Maybe it won't. And
they're assuming if you keep it walking, it will. Because it wasn't securely fastened.
okay.
Now, in the case of the saddle, so now Rav Papa gives a different reason. He says removing the saddle is to cool the donkey. Adding the saddle cloth is to warm the donkey. Warming is more necessary than cooling. Okay, why? That's what people say. That that even in the summertime a donkey's cold. So donkeys feel cold, they need warmth. But to remove the saddle because it's overheated, it can live with being a little warm. It's not that big of a deal. There is an objection. Lo yetzeh asus bezanav shu'al v'lo bezar rorit sheben enav. V'lo yetzeh azav bekis shelo v'lo izim bekis shebedadehen. V'lo para b'chasom shebepfia v'lo siachim betraskalin shebefihem l'reshut harabim. V'lo behema besandal sheberagleha v'lo bekamea afal bishu mumche. Okay, so this is a long description of things you are and aren't allowed to do in this Tosefta. So it says first, means these are different charms that they would put, basically different, what you would call a sigulot. They would put like a red string between its eyes. They would put the tail of a shu'al, of a fox, on it. It was like
ornamental.
Or some kind of like lucky sigulot that people would do.
No practical function.
No practical function. Right. So you can't let them go out with that. The zav can't go with his kis. The zav is somebody who's leaking this gonorrheal discharge. So they would go out with a special container in their underwear, basically, that would collect it. So they can't go out with that because it's not an ornament and it's not a garment. And the izim can't go with the covering over their udders that collects milk. And the para can't go, b'chasom shebefiyah. It can't go with the muzzle on its mouth that prevents it from eating. Because it's not an ornament and it's not a garment. And the young animals can't go out with the baskets around their necks to eat, their feeding bags, to the Reshut HaRabim. Okay, that implies, by the way, if it's not Reshut HaRabim, you'd be allowed to, right? Okay. Let's keep that in mind. Okay, and the animal cannot go out with a sandal shibaraglah. This is not talking about like a horseshoe that they nail on. It's just talking about any other shoe that they would put on the animal because it might fall off. Velo b'kamea. They can't go out with an amulet. Okay? Even if it's by a mumche. Meaning, even if it's one that is made by a person who would write amulets, that they saw that he healed many people with his amulets, they still can't let the animal go out. And this is a stringency with an animal as opposed to a person. We're going to see which one of these is a stringency. But he can go out with a bandage on, and with a splint that's holding like a fracture in, and if it's in the middle of giving birth and it's protruding, the placenta is protruding out, it can go out to the Reshut HaRabim like that. And even though you're not allowed to go with an animal with a bell on it because it looks like you're going to the marketplace, if you plug up the bell, you can let it walk around in the courtyard wearing the bell. So all of these things are various just halachot that are related to this issue of what animals can and can't wear. And now we're going to get to the relevance of it to our discussion. Okay? It says that these young animals can't go out with the feeding baskets over their necks, right? But it's a Reshut HaRabim. But you said that you can't have it even at home. The implication is that in the chatzer, if they're home, in the barn, you could put the feeding bag on their head. And you were telling me you can't do it at all because it's unnecessary exertion for the animal. On behalf of the animal, I mean. And isn't it saying that in the courtyard, even large animals who could bend their necks and eat are allowed to have a feeding bag over their head? Answer, no. No, it's because with little animals who can't bend their necks, it's really a tsa'ar for them to reach where they need to reach the food. That's why you're allowed to do it. But large animals, who it's just a matter of convenience, you don't have to go around making life as convenient as possible for your animals on Shabbat.
I mean, that's what they call it, ta'anug, I guess.
Ta'anug is, it's convenience, yeah. He says, this is a great Shabbat. You know, look, I'm having a great Shabbat. So Diganami, there's a proof for this, the Katana, because it says, Dum Yedekameah. Because it says it near the kameah. What's a kameah? An amulet that was put on an animal to heal it when it's sick. So too, the feeding basket that was put around the neck was to remove tsa'ar, to remove pain. If it were just convenience, it wouldn't be allowed at all. Shema, now that's what we conclude. Amar Mar, the master said, below the kameah. You cannot, and we're on Amud Bet now, so you can't use an amulet, even though it's designed by an expert. Now, there's a big machloket, of course, about kameot, and it's a whole philosophical thing. We don't want to get too sidetracked. There's a fundamental machloket Rishonim between the Rambam and his school and some of the others. The others say, I'm giving them kavod by putting them first. The others say kameot really work. And the reason why there's a difference between a professional kameah by someone who's been tried and tested is because his really work. So when you wear it, we're not worried that you're going to take it off because you really have trust in it. As opposed to a kameah by an eno mumche, somebody who's not a professional, who doesn't have a reputation for effective kameot, that you're not going to rely on him, just like a prescription of a doctor that you don't know if this doctor's any good. The Rambam says no. Actually, kameot don't work at all. It's all psychological. And there's a psychological difference. Because if this is an amulet that you got from a new Kabbalist, that we don't know if his kameot work, so you're not really going to trust it. But if you got a kameah from the Baba Saleh, granted, according to the Rambam, it's just as good as the kameah from the other guy, and not going to work either. But in your mind, you're going to keep it on because you're going to trust it.
But you're not supposed to trust the ambulance. It's like an intermediary between you and Hashem. You're supposed to rely on Hashem.
Well, I think that the Rishonim that allowed amulets, the Rambam will say, listen, it doesn't work. But it makes you feel good. It's like he would basically say it's a psychological. What do you call it? Psychosomatic healing, right? But the other Rishonim, it's not that they're considering it idolatry. They'll say it's like a tefillah. You say a tefillah with your mouth. You say a tefillah by putting it on you. That's what they would say.
But regardless of whether you think that it works or not, the result is the same.
Exactly. Whether it's psychosomatic or it's metaphysical, it works.
The result is
right.
It makes you feel good.
Like the Rambam says, if somebody's dying, right, you're not supposed to say Pesukim to heal somebody because you're using Divrei Torah for the physical well-being. But he says, if a person's in danger and they say Pesukim, even though it doesn't work, it makes you feel better. So it works. It works because it makes you feel better.
Placebo effect.
A placebo.
There's fewer side effects.
Right. Placebo. It's true. I've never heard of any side effects from placebo.
Right.
Yeah. So So you can't use a kamea for an animal, even though it's from the Baba Saleh. You can't use it. Well, he didn't make kamea, did he? I don't know. But pick one that did. Who did? Rav Kaduri. Okay, we'll say Rav Kaduri. Okay.
They sold the blessed water.
They did? Okay. All right, so Fahanan Tanan. But we learned in the Mishnah, V'lo b'kamea she'eno mumche. In another Mishnah it says, V'lo b'kamea she'eno mumche. That you can't use a kamea that is not professional. But even for an animal, you can use one that is professional. That contradicts ours. So ha mumche shapir dameh, implying that a tried and tested one from Rav Kaduri would be good. Hachanami she'eno mumche. So then we must conclude that it's only a non-professional that you're not allowed to let your animal go out with. But we just read in the Tosefta, even though it's professionally done from Rav Kaduri, you can't do it. You can't let the animal go out in it. So the Gemara answers the only possible answer, which is mumche adam ve'ino mumche lebehema. What it means is you went to Rav Kaduri and said, I want an amulet to cure me, and he gave you one. And then you said, you know what? Spot is also sick. I'm going to give my amulet to Spot because I want to heal him. So that's only. But when you got it from Rav Kaduri, it was Rav Kaduri's amulets are known to work for people, not for dogs. So it's no good.
And that Spot really believes in Rav Kaduri.
He believes in it, yeah. For sure. Because he's a Gilgul of yeah. So is there such a thing as a kamea that's a mumche for Adam that is tested for man but not for animals? Yes. Adam did le mazala misayale that a person, since he has mazal, which actually Rashi interprets in Bava Kama when it says mazala, it means intelligence. In other words, since there's a part of the person involved here, it's different. Behema deletla mazala lo misayale. It's not going to help the animal because he doesn't have mazal. Now you can interpret mazal as meaning that the human being has special divine providence, but actually Rashi in Bava Kama says that when it says a person has mazal and an animal doesn't have mazal, it actually means that a person has intelligence. That's what Rashi says in Bava Kama. And that it means that therefore, and you could apply that here too, that in both ways, according to both interpretations, that basically, if it's a psychosomatic thing, obviously, Fluffy doesn't have intelligence, he doesn't relate to the fact that it came from Rav Kaduri. And if it's spiritual, even then, even according to the other Rishonim, it's not going to have this, for you to wear the amulet, maybe somehow it's going to bring you closer to God, it's going to be a healing, source of healing. Not for Fluffy.
We haven't addressed the issue. Do mumche make special kameyot for animals?
Apparently so. Apparently...
So when you make it for an animal, then it's okay.
It could be good.
That's how much you...
Right.
Exactly. It's like the Mishaberach for the dog. It's like the Hashkava for the dog story.
The bar mitzvah?
Yeah, at the bar mitzvah. Yeah. No, there's the story about a guy who comes and he says to the rabbi, "Can you make hashkava for my dog?" And he says, "We don't do prayers for dogs." And he says, "But he left a lot of money." He said, "What was his name?" All right. Yeah, that's it. So anyway,
Spot.
yeah. So he said, yeah. Or as Mrs. Amsalam always tells the joke, "Zichrono livracha." What was his name? All right. Your aunt. What she tells him. So, if so, if you can use an amulet that's designed for a person and is tested for a person on Shabbat, and you can give one to an animal that was designed for an animal and has been tested with animals, okay, then on Shabbat, so then why does it say this is a stringency of animals over people? It's the same rule. So what does the Gemara say? No. That mi savrat akamea ka'e, that statement that there's a stringency of animals over people wasn't referring to the case of the amulet. A sandal ka'e, it was talking about the sandal, the shoe. Because a person's allowed to wear shoes on Shabbat, but an animal is not allowed to wear shoes on Shabbat because we're worried that the shoe is going to come off. And then you're going to end up carrying it. Tashma, come and listen. You can oil the skin of a person. In other words, if they have a wound or whatever, you want to make them feel better, you can put oil on them on Shabbat, and you can remove scabs from their skin on Shabbat. but not for an animal. Doesn't this mean that even though the animal's suffering, you can't do it? No, because these are for pleasure. In other words, you're putting oil on your body for pleasure, and the wound already healed. You're just peeling off the scab. So for a person, enjoyment is okay. For an animal, that's an additional tircha you're doing on Shabbat just for the animal. You shouldn't do it. Listen, an animal that had some kind of a congestion of blood of some sort, you can't bring it to the water to cool it off. But a person can go into the water to cool off on Shabbat if he has this fever from blood or whatever it is. What's the reason? The reason is because of the same gezerah that we don't use medicine on Shabbat, because you might grind medicines, the prohibition of refu'ah, of healing, medical healing on Shabbat. So but what about the person? So why is the animal subject to this prohibition and not the person? Adam nira kemekir. Because the person, it looks like he's just going to take a skin, he's going to take a cool off in the water. Okay, he wants to cool off. Take a little dip in the water. The animal, not so much. Maybe you're taking the animal just to cool off. Answer, and meker lebehema. People don't take their animals to go cool off in the pool. Now that was true 2,000 years ago. Nowadays, people take their dogs to spas. It might be different. And do we really apply the prohibition of medical treatment to animals? We have a statement in a Braita that says that if the animal goes outside of the tchum, you can call the animal to come to you. You can't go outside the tchum obviously to get it, but you can call it to come to you, even though and we don't have to be concerned that you're going to go and bring it into the tchum. So we see that rabbinic prohibitions, we're not worried of one thing leading to the other over here when it comes to animals. So the Gemara answers no. Amar Ravina says Kigon shayatuchum shela muvla betoch techum shelo. So Rashi explains what this means. That what it means is to say that normally an animal follows the same rule of techum as the owner. The owner is allowed to go a maximum of 2,000 amot outside of the area where he's spending Shabbat. The animal also. But what if your animal was being taken care of by a shepherd, and the shepherd lived somewhere else? So his 2,000 amot terminate before yours do. So actually this animal is within your 2,000 amot, but outside of its own 2,000 amot. That's why you're allowed to call it back. Because even if you went to get it, you're causing it to violate the law of Techum, because you're going to make it move. Okay? But you won't violate the law of Techum even if you go get it. So we see that we do apply the same rules to animals. So just like for your own personal healing, we're worried you might grind medicines on Shabbat, even though nowadays that's unlikely, but that's another story, okay? They were worried about that back then. So too, if you were to treat your animal medically, we're worried that the same might happen.
That means if you have an outdoor cat, you can't let the cat out.
Well, it's not going to go past the tchum. It's going to go that far.
How do you know? How do you know?
That'd be far.
Since when the Torah was given to animals?
Shavitat behema, what do you mean?
No, but the animal is considered a possession of yours.
That's true.
No, an animal is considered a possession.
Yeah, but the animal is not obligated to keep Torah.
But you are.
Yeah, but your kelim are an extension of you.
You own the animal.
Your property is an extension of you with Techum. Your objects are subject to Techum also. Even inanimate objects can't be carried outside the Techum by somebody, let's say, who wanted to bring something of yours. That's it's a separate thing. How do you know? Maybe animals are people too. Okay. So anyway,
but that represents a real practical problem. Let's say a cat or a dog, okay?
Right.
It's an outdoor cat, right?
But you
can't keep it inside because that's entrapment. And if you get it, and if you let the dog out, it's going to.
But it can go outside the home. You just can't bring it there, because when it goes out and it comes back. And,
okay. So that.
I mean, like he said, he's not a bar mitzvah.
That's not free will.
Right. He's just going. But you can't bring your animals to graze. Let's say you want to bring them out. You just go. That's the issue. So, Rav. That's true. Well, yes, we are. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Rav Nachman said, this whole issue of whether the restriction on medical treatment applies to animals is a machloket tanaim. Because the Tanya is willing to the Braita. If the animal ate too much of a certain type of plant. Lo yiritzena b'chatzer b'shvil shetitrapeh. So one of the things they would do was make it run in the chatzer so that it would go to the bathroom, so that it would make it constipated.
It's type of
okay.
pumpkin version.
So Rabbi Oshaya matir. Rabbi Oshaya allowed you to run the animal to get its bowels moving again. Tarash Rava halacha Rabbi Oshaya, and the halacha follows Rabbi Oshaya that even though we have a restriction of taking medicines on Shabbat, it doesn't apply to animals. Amar Mar, the master said, Lo yetze hazav bekis shelo v'lo yizim bekis shebedadehen. It said that a zav cannot go out with his pouch to collect his gonorrhea, his discharge, nor can the goats go out, the female goats, with the covering over their udders collecting milk. So Vatani, but we learned Yotzaot izim bekis shebedadehen. We learned in a Braita that they can go out with a cover over their udders. So how can we have a contradiction? Amar Rav Yehuda lo kashya. No contradiction. Had mihadak, had lo mihadak. No problem. It depends. If you tightly fasten it on, we're not worried that the pouch is going to fall and you're going to come to carry it. No problem. But if it's loose, then we're worried. Rav Yosef Amar. This is a very funny retort. Rav Yosef says, Tana'eh shaklat me'alma. Have you removed all of the Tana'im from the world? You're just making your own distinctions here? There are two statements and you're just making up a distinction. What about the Tana'im? Tana'ih, it's a machloket Tana'im. Because we learned already, the Tanakh, as it says in the Mishnah, Ha'izim yotzot b'tzirurot, even in our Mishnah it says. The first opinion said that the goats can go out with their udders tied up. Rabbi Yosef oser b'chulan chutz min ha'rachelot ha'kivunot. Rabbi Yosef prohibited that, and Rabbi Yehuda omer, Izim yotzot tzirurot liyabesh, avol lo lechalev. So Rabbi Yehuda was the one who said that if it's tightly fastened because the purpose is to stop lactating, it's okay. If it's loosely fastened because the purpose is to catch milk, it's not okay. So the point here is that that we have already three different opinions. One that's totally permissive, Rabbi Yosef who's totally prohibiting, and a middle position. Why would you just make up a distinction to resolve the two braitot when they could be representing two opinions here? So one possibility is that the permissive view is that of the Tanakh Kama in our Mishnah, and the prohibitive view is that of Rabbi Yosef. Or v'ibait ema hava Rabbi Yehuda. Both braitot could actually be Rabbi Yehuda, v'la kashya, kan liyabesh, kan lechalev. One braita was talking about where you tied it tightly to stop the lactating. One was talking about where you were collecting milk. Okay, so we can resolve it with reference to the machloket Tanaim we already had. Tani, we learned in the braita. Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, Maseh be'izim bet Antochia. There was an event with the goats of the house of Antochia. Shayud dehen gasin. They had very large udders. Vasulan kisin kadesh lo yisartu dehen, that they would actually drag on the ground. So they would have to put special coverings over them so that they wouldn't be hurt by the dragging on the ground, and that was certainly considered okay because it was protecting the animal. It was like clothing. The rabbis taught. There was a problem that a man, his wife died while she was nursing, so they had a baby that didn't have any mother to nurse from. So he couldn't afford to hire a wet nurse. So he didn't have the ability to do that. He had a miracle. He had a miracle. All of a sudden he developed the ability to nurse his child. There was a miracle. Amar Rav Yosef said, look at what a big guy this is. This is a great man that God did such a miracle for him. Amar Abaye said to him, I disagree. Look how low this guy is. The universe had to change for him. So it's a very interesting machloket. Do we see the doing of a miracle as as a positive thing, that the person, that God saved them basically by a miracle, or do we say no? If he were so great, God would have saved them naturally. That's a greater, like the Rambam always says, the beauty is when nature works. A miracle is when it is a failure. That means that we need an intervention. Avraham Avinu didn't need miracles. Yitzchak Avinu didn't need miracles. Yaakov Avinu didn't need miracles because they were on such a high level. They didn't need that. The Jews leaving Mitzrayim, they needed miracles. They were on a lower level. Being on a higher level means you need less. So for the fact that you need miracles isn't a positive, according to Abaye. Rav Nachman said, Teda, know that this is true. The mitrachesh nisa. I'm sorry, I skipped. Rav Yehuda says, "Bo'u re'eh kama kashim mizonotav shel adam, shenishtanu alav sidrei bereshit." That look how difficult it is for human beings to be sustained, because we see that creation, that this person, in other words, that parnasa is so difficult. In other words, having sustenance, having a livelihood is so difficult. Because this person had to have a miracle happen to be able to nurse his child, but he couldn't find money to be able to pay a wet nurse. Okay? In other words, it would have been easier for him to just find a better job or make more money so he could hire somebody. Instead, God did a miracle. So you see how difficult it is to provide a livelihood. It's more difficult to provide a livelihood than just to make a miracle and allow a man to nurse. Okay? Amar Rav Nachman said, Teda, know that it's true. Because we see that a miracle happened here. That in general, miracles happen to save people. But nobody ever opens up their storehouse and finds a ton of wheat in there. Nobody ever opens their bank account and finds that God put $1 billion in there. And yet, miracles can happen to save lives sometimes, but not to provide livelihood or sustenance. Another story, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, there was a man who once married a woman with only one arm. And guess what? He never noticed until she died. She must have been pretty dexterous with the one arm that she had. Amar Rav said, look how tsanua, how modest this woman must have been, that this man never realized she was missing a limb all the time. She was missing a hand, let's say, not an arm. Amar lo Rabbi Chia said, Zodar kabekach. Listen, any woman who's missing a hand is going to hide it. She's not going to want to show it. But but look at how modest the man was, that he paid so little attention to his wife's physical body that he never noticed she was missing a hand. Except when she said, "Hey, can you give me a hand with this?" But I didn't get my drum roll. Okay. Zecharim yotzin livuvin. So this is the last piece we're going to do. So it said that the rams can go out livuvin. My livuvin. What does livuvin mean? Amar Ravuna tutre. It means they can go strapped one to the other. In other words, they can go out in pairs, that they would strap them to each other to go out in pairs. And my mashma dahay livuvin lishana dikrovehu. How do we know that the word livuvin means closeness to a pair being together? Dichtiv libavtini achoti chala. Right, because when it talks about the love, that it means you've ignited passion within me, my beloved, in Shir HaShirim. But it means a couple. So we see, livuvin means togetherness. It comes from the word heart. Ula says, or shekoshrin lehem keneged libam, kedei shelo yiplu alehen ze'evim. That wolves who would come and attack these rams, they wouldn't attack them, because what they would do is they would put a special cloth over their hearts, and that was where the wolf would normally jump at them. So it was like a bulletproof vest. Okay, they would have it over their hearts.
Are we still talking about the udders tied to collect the male?
No, we're done with that.
We're done. So
now we're talking about the other thing that said rams can go out livuvin, which we're trying to find out, what does that mean? Does it mean strapped one to the other? Does it mean a special pad that they would put over their hearts from lev? To protect it from wolves. Okay, so the Gemara asks, wait a second. It said in the Mishnah that only the male rams would have this. Do wolves only like to eat male rams? Why? They're more tasty. No, mishum de masgu beresh edra, because they're in the front of the pack. So those are the first ones the wolves jump on. But uzevin beresh edra nafle b'sof edra lo nafle. Are you telling me that wolves only go for the front of the pack? They don't go for the back? Ela mishum de shamne. Oh, it's because they're fat. The men are fat. Umenekevot leka shamne. You're telling me there are no females that are large? Vetu miyad eben hani lahani. And how discriminating are these wolves exactly? Well, I'm only going to go for the best one. It says the reason is because since the rams walk in the front and they walk with their necks up and they look side to side, it looks threatening to the wolves, so they might attack them, and therefore they would have this special protection over their chests. Okay, now Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar. Now we're all trying to explain, what did it mean livuvin in the Mishnah? What is this thing that these rams are allowed to wear? So we had two different opinions so far. One was that they can go out in pairs, tied to one another. One is that they can go out with this special thing over their chest. Now, the third opinion is Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, "Or shekoshin lehen tachat zachrutan kedei shelo yalu ala nekevot," that they would have a special pad that they would put over their genital area, so they would not mount the females. Sometimes they would want to prevent that. Mimai, and how do I know that that's what that this word means? How do I know that livuvin means covering the genital area? Midekatani sefa, because of what it says afterwards when it talks about the female sheep. Varachalim yotzaot shechuzot. That it says that the female sheep can go out shechuzot. What does shechuzot mean? Mine shechuzot sheochazin ha'aliyah shelahen lemala kedei sheyalu alehen zecharim. That was something that they did that would hold the tail of the sheep up to encourage procreation. So just like Resha, the beginning was talking kedei shelo yalu ala nekevot v'sefa kedei shelo alehen zecharim. In other words, just like the one that referred to the rams, the males, okay, or rather, just like the one at the end that's talking about the females, it's talking about something having to do with reproduction. In that case, encouraging it. So when it's talking about the males, we're going to assume it's talking about something related to reproduction, in this case, discouraging it. But both would be allowed, according to the Tanna Kama.
They learned it from Yaakov.
That could be too, yeah. Yeah. My mashma dahai shechuzot lishana digaluyehu. How do you know that shechuzot means revealing the genitals of the female animal so that it will encourage procreation? Or reproductive activity. Dichtiv, as it says in the pasuk, v'hine isha likrato shit zona untzurat lev. That shit zona untzurat lev is talking about it talks about a woman who's coming, who is a shit zona means her private area is exposed, untzurat lev, and she is a woman who is it's talking about a woman of ill repute, basically, okay, who's trying to attract the man. So the point here is shit zona is shechuzot is the zayin of zonah is in there, and the shin of shit is in there. So in other words, it's a notrikon. Somehow it's referring to this pasuk that talks about the woman who exposes herself. This woman who exposes herself is shechuzot, means exposing the female sheep so that they will encourage the male sheep to mount them. And here we conclude for today. Have a great day.